friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And I'm here today to address some questions in regards to vinegar making. And I'm not sure when this video is going to publish. If it's December, just understand this video is being shot at the end of October, so I still have my fall decor out. But at any rate, yes, I have a lot of videos on vinegar and making and answering of questions. I'll link to my full vinegar playlist down below. But if you're just wanting a very concise and thorough video on making vinegar, all the things you can make vinegar from, what I'm going to do is actually make sure that that video is at the top of the playlist so that that will be the first one you see, because I've been shooting vinegar making videos from the time I started my channel, and I've started doing things a little bit differently even through the past 9 or so years. And so what I have here is apple scrap vinegar, but I make far more vinegar than just apple, but this is the time of the year I'm doing apple scrap vinegar. So this question is specifically in regards to mold. It's a question I get a lot, and while I've answered parts of it here and there throughout the years, I really wanted to go a little bit more in depth about this in a standalone video. So the question I got was somebody was concerned because they had mold on their vinegar. They didn't know if they should throw it out. Now, they weren't clear as to if the vinegar was in this process when they got the mold or if it was after. But either way, I'll be covering both situations so you can understand, is it good or is it not? Why is it forming, etc. So this vinegar here, I actually have 2 more over there, but this one is older by at least a couple of weeks than this one. This one has already got to the point that it is no longer fizzing. It should be pretty close to being done. And you can see right now there's actually a SCOBY forming on the top. But I do have a video within that vinegar playlist about SCOBYs, what they are. SCOBY is an acronym. A lot of people think it's just a word by itself, but it is an acronym that stands for the symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. So that's what that little slimy thing at the top is. Now, when your vinegar is still in the fizzy stage, like this one here is, because you can see that foamy stuff on the top. Maybe you can see a little bit better there. All right, now I'm going to try to hold this still while I push this down. So when it's in this fizzy stage, what's going to happen, and you're making any kind of scrap vinegar like this, is it's going to keep wanting to push the material up so that it comes up and out of the liquid. And you see how foamy that is? That's because right now it is in the process of turning the sugars in there into alcohol. And then what happens is, as it continues to ferment, the bacteria and yeast in there is going to turn, people will say specifically yeast, but there's both in there. That's how you get a SCOBY, right? A symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. And yes, a SCOBY and a mother are the same thing. Even while some of the first sugars are turned to alcohol and the alcohol is then turning into acetic acid, there's still going to be more in there. So this is why it takes a whole month-long process. But generally speaking, the first 2 weeks is the bacteria and yeast are turning the sugars into alcohol. The last 2 weeks is that alcohol, through the oxygen exposure, is being turned then into acetic acid. Now, what can happen is, if you're not maybe daily, maybe every couple of days, it just really depends on how warm it is in your home and how active your vinegar is, but you just stir it or push it down. I would say once a day. There might be times, especially if you're in a really warm climate, you might need to do it twice a day. But by doing that, it's going to do a couple things. It's going to help prevent it from bubbling over, which can happen. And it's also going to prevent mold from forming on the top of your vinegar during the process. Now, I used to just start my vinegar and leave it for a month, put it on top of my refrigerator and forget about it. Just mark it on my calendar and then check it. And yes, there was mold on the top of whatever I was making the vinegar out of. But I never worried about it, because at that point I would then lift it out, lift all that material out, and then strain the rest of it out. Toss the moldy stuff and then strain the rest out. But I still wasn't, and some people might say, well, what if some of that mold still, you don't get it all, and it still falls into the vinegar? Not worried about it, because as you'll notice, as you look at your vinegar, if it has mold on top, because you weren't stirring on a regular basis, there's no mold anywhere where it's actually touching the liquid, because that vinegar is going to prevent the mold from forming, whether it be it's still in the early stage where it's got a lot of sugar in it, or later when it's got alcohol, or later when it's got vinegar, because all those things do help prevent mold, but it's not going to prevent it from the top if it's exposed to the air. So that's why you got to keep it below the surface. But again, if it forms on there, it doesn't mean you have to throw it out. At that point is when I'd be like, oh, I forgot to keep stirring it, there's mold on it, I just won't bother. I'll let it finish the process. Then I'll just lift it out. But since I've been good about stirring most of the time, that's just not something I have to worry about. I don't even have to stir it daily, as long as I do it every so often. In fact, it was a few days ago I stirred this last, because I keep forgetting about it, especially when it's in here instead of in my kitchen. So now, yes, it's not an issue. You don't need to throw it out in that, if that's when the mold formed. However, if later, after you've strained your vinegar, and it is truly vinegar, you put it in a container that doesn't have an airtight lid on it, like while we're doing the process, we want cloth or a paper towel, just something to cover it. That is for the purpose of keeping dust and bugs out of it, while also allowing the gases to escape and allowing the oxygen to get in. This is why we don't use pickling tops of any kind. Any kind of airlock, you're just going to end up with alcohol. You need the oxygen for it to become vinegar. That's why we just put a cloth over it. However, once it is done, if it continues to be exposed to oxygen, over time, what's going to happen is, because you still have active things in here, live things in here, it's going to keep working. And once it's worked through all the sugars and then worked through all the alcohols, it's then going to basically clean up after itself, and it's going to clean up all the vinegar. So it's going to take all that, it's going to eat up all the acetic acid in your vinegar, and now all you're left with is nasty water. And that is when you see mold form on that. In that case, it's not vinegar anymore, it's no good for anything, and it needs to be dumped. I have had that happen to me before, back when I used to just use the plastic caps, because I switched from the canning lids, because those get a good seal, but because of the metal of the bands and the lids themselves, eventually the acetic acid just corrodes the lids and the bands. And so then I switched to the plastic lids. But the problem with just the plain plastic lids, if you don't have any kind of silicone liner in there, you're not getting a tight enough seal that's going to prevent air from getting in. And so the oxygen getting in is what caused some of my vinegars to do that. So that was when I then started getting the silicone liners. I started with the little silicone rings, but now they have the ones that cover the whole inside of the lid. That's better yet, because plastic can still be breathable. And so I cover the whole inside of the lid with that and put it on nice and tight. And that is when I put it in storage. Have never had another problem with that very thing happening. So if the mold forms during the process of it being made, no big deal. If it forms after you've had it in storage for a month or so, then yes, it's going to need to be tossed, because it is no longer vinegar. So I hope that clears some things up, at least as far as the mold and what to do about it. But again, I cover a lot more specific topics in regards to vinegar and vinegar making in that playlist. It's pretty long. I got a lot of videos in there. So you can just go to that playlist and scroll through there and see what all I have in there. And hopefully there'll be some more things in there that can help answer some of the questions and concerns you may have about making your own vinegar. And any thoughts, ideas you'd like to share, please put them in comments down below, because people like hearing from you guys as well. And thanks for watching. Take care, and God bless.